So Daily News does this hatchet job on Bernie Sanders, and I just wanted to clarify for everybody what gotcha questions are, okay? Because were these gotcha questions in the Daily News interview, and the Republicans always complain about the gotcha questions. So this is your easy guide for what is and is not a gotcha question. So there's 4 layers of gotcha questions. One is the Sarah Palin layer. What newspapers do you read in the morning? And she goes, what kind of gotcha questions?
All of them. I read all of the papers in the morning.
She literally complained about that question. No, she was trying to be nice. She was asking you a softball. What do you read, right? That's not a hard question. And she was complaining about the Supreme Court. Katie Kirk asked Sarah Palin, other than Roe versus Wade, what other Supreme Court decision are you against? Not the minutia of, hey, this particular Supreme Court decision, did you agree with the dissent or the majority? Just name me one other case that you don't like about the Supreme Court because you just told me how bad they are. It's the most normal follow-up. So those are not gotcha questions. They're perfectly normal questions. The second layer is, okay, now this is getting a little harder. It's the overly specific questions. So the overly specific questions are like what they did to George W. Bush. Hey, who's the leader of Pakistan? You know, who's the leader of these major countries if you're going to be president? Now, Bush didn't know most of those answers, and the Republicans cried for days, right? But again, okay, you don't know the leader of Pakistan. Like if you're a plumber and you don't know him, you're not supposed to know him, right? You're running for president, you probably should know him, but the point is you have the right concepts. So Bush there said, oh yeah, he was democratically elected. No, he was a general who was got in power through a coup. So see, that part is relevant. That part is very relevant. And then if I said to you, okay, McCutcheon versus Citizens United, what are the difference between those two very important cases relating to money in politics? I hope a presidential nominee knows that, but they might not know all the details. But then if they said, hey, look, the problem is they're both for getting more money into politics, whether it's for political parties or it's through individuals or corporations making donations, and I'm against that. Great, that's a great answer. So I don't mind the press asking those because we're going to get to find out what your positions are. Those are tough questions, but I think legitimate. Okay, now we get into the illegitimate areas. Setup questions. So Daily News has the classic example here where they asked Bernie Sanders, hey, what do you think about the Sandy Hook families suing the gun manufacturers? They know that he is against suing gun manufacturers in some instances. So he says, look, if it's a case of knowingly selling a whole bunch of weapons that you think are going to be used by bad guys, well, then that makes sense to sue them. But if you think you're just suing them for making a legal product, I don't think you should. Oh, are you saying the lawsuit by the families are baseless? He's like, no, I didn't say they were baseless. I just gave you my standard. The next day they run the headline, okay? Bernie Sanders, shame about Sandy Hook. That's a setup question. You meant to screw him over. They had like, look, there it is, Bernie Sandy Hook shame. Now, they had about a dozen of those in this article. Daily News asked him in the beginning, you say that there are some corporate influences that are, corporations that are not doing the right things, that are destroying the fabric of America. Do you think Apple is destroying the fabric of America? They know that Apple makes a fairly popular product, the iPhone, right? So if he falls into that trap and says yes, they're like, the next headline would be, Bernie Sanders says your iPhone is destroying the fabric of America. Radical socialist, come on. What is this? He doesn't fall for the trap. He says, no, look, I have some issues with how Apple deals with taxes, which is very, very true and a very specific policy point. In an interview, they claim he was empty and absurd. He gave 2 specific examples of what Apple was doing wrong. They said, well, can you name 3 American corporate giants that are destroying the national fabric? These are the first 2 questions they asked him. Immediately, it's a trap, right? And if he names any specific corporations that are in any way popular, they're going to jump down his throat and they're going to run those headlines. That's a setup question. So that goes into actual gotcha. The last one is the biggest problem. These are actual dirty questions. The classic one being, when did you stop beating your wife? There's no good answer to that, right? In the case of this Daily News article, man, they had 1,000 of them. But when the classic one was the one we mentioned as we were discussing the main story about the Daily News, when they say, how would you break up the banks? And he says, well, I would use the Treasury and the authority under Dodd-Frank. Perfect answer. They say, oh, so are you saying the Federal Reserve has the authority to do that? He says, no, I was talking about Dodd-Frank. They're like, oh, so you think Federal Reserve doesn't have the authority to do it? I didn't mention the Federal Reserve, you did, right? So they purposely switched topics on him in an effort to screw him over. I mean, that is as dirty as it gets. So I can't imagine a dirtier interview than this Daily News interview of Bernie Sanders. So those are your 4 different kinds of gotcha questions. And then the last one is exactly what the Daily News did. They did the last 3, actually, on that list. So it was not a legitimately tough interview. It was an interview meant to screw over the person you're interviewing, no matter what answer they give. God, man, the media hates Bernie Sanders. So I'll give you another example from the Daily News. They're talking about the Israeli settlements. He says, well, some of those are illegal. And they say, oh, yeah? Under what statute? Really? You know the UN resolutions that makes those illegal? What the banks did fraud, Bernie Sanders says. Everybody thinks they did fraud. Almost everybody does, right? Because they would say, hey, you can get a loan no matter what. And it turns out they doctored the papers. That's fraud. They admitted in the emails we're screwing over our own customers. That's fraud. They're like, oh, what statute? What federal statute? I'm supposed to know the federal statutes by heart and cite it for you? Oh, yes, that's Federal Statute 13B, Section 4C, right? And they're like, oh, he didn't know the statute. I guess he doesn't know how to break up the big banks. On the settlements, he says, okay, they're illegal under the treaties that were signed and according to the resolutions. That's absolutely true. They're like, oh, I see. Okay, so you don't know which specific resolutions they violated. Now, would you move the goalpost here and say, based on what you're saying, that before we go into negotiations, Israel should stop the settlements? But wait a minute, that's not moving the goalpost. That's the current U.S. position. See, they're lying again. Again and again and again, they lie in an effort to get people to think, oh my God, Bernie Sanders is so radical on Israel. All of a sudden, he wants them to stop building settlements. Not all of a sudden. That's been the U.S. position even under George W. Bush.
And that shouldn't even be considered a radical position.
That's the least radical position there is.
It's only radical in the United States. Apparently.
And then they go to do another setup question. Hamas. Do you believe Hamas is a terrorist organization? Wait, why would you even ask that question? Yes, the U.S. State Department has called them a terrorist organization. So it plants in the reader's head, maybe Bernie Sanders doesn't think the Hamas is a terrorist organization. We had to ask him the question. You never know. I mean, it goes on and on and on. Let me give you one last one. So then they go to the Kitty Dukakis question. So this is when Michael Dukakis was asked in a presidential debate, you're against the death penalty. What if someone had raped and killed your wife? Kitty Dukakis. What would you do then? See, that's a gotcha question because it sets up an overly emotional situation. And it's hard for the person to say, yeah, go ahead, rape and kill my wife. I'm not going to do anything about it. You're screwed if you say that. You seem soft and weak, right? But if you all of a sudden flip-flop on your position and go, I'm against the death penalty, well, you're screwed. You're screwed either way, right? Now, I have a strong answer to that. And Bernie Sanders apparently has a strong answer to that. But they did that trick on him. They're like, oh, you're against the death penalty. Great. How about Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who did 9/11 and killed all those people in New York? Are you saying he doesn't deserve the death penalty? And Bernie Sanders says, look, I'm against the death penalty on principle. I don't think it serves as a deterrence, and I think that it does something to our moral fabric. So I don't want to do that to us. Wow, what a great answer, right? But you'd have to come up with a nearly perfect answer, because if you didn't, the next day's headline in Daily News is, Bernie Sanders shame for Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. Daily News, fuck you, okay? We know, you think we don't know, I know. All of you guys in the establishment press, the corporate press, you love to play patty cakes and congratulate us. They're orgasmic over this at the Daily News. They think, oh my God, Tina Brown quoted us in a positive way, and so did Chris Salissa. Oh yes, and Morning Joe liked it, and everybody hates Bernie Sanders now. We got him, right? No, but you see, what you didn't expect is the internet. So here, we can break down all of your goddamn lies and tell everybody about it. Now, you think this helped you? No, it didn't help you. You know what it did? For everyone under the age of 35, at a bare minimum, this interview totally undermined any shred of credibility you had. So you're done. Nobody under 35 is going to read your crap. I mean, they weren't reading it in the first place, and these guys pretend to be liberal. No, you're hacks. You're hacks who are pro-establishment, pro-Hillary Clinton, and you'll do anything to undermine an actual progressive. So Daily News, it was nice knowing you. Keep losing. By the way, do you have any idea what kind of money they lose every single year? freaking losers to their core. They can't figure out how to sell paper, so they do this hatchet job instead. Well, you're going to go bankrupt, and no one's going to shed a tear.